Hello, I'm Michael Parker, and welcome to Antidote. Technology is here to stay. That mini computer you have in your back pocket you call a smartphone, it's a handy thing. It allows us to multitask on the go. But to some, it's become an extension of their own body and their identity, especially to the young. So the question is has technology liberated us or enchained us? Joining us in the studio today to discuss this is Dr. Lisa Strohman. She is the founder and director of the Technology Wellness Center.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
So can I call you Lisa?
Yes.
Great. You're a parent. I'm a parent. Is that how you got inspired to do this work?
I did. Yes, about 10 years ago in my private practice as a psychologist, I started seeing teenagers and young adults starting to get impacted before I even had kids. And when I had kids, I realized everything that was coming along, the iPod, all of these different things that were making it so much easier for little kids would really impact them later in life. So as a parent, I thought I should found something, help other parents, and really spread the word of what the dangers were.
So you're a lawyer and a psychologist.
I am.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, let's talk about this because, listen, every kid loves technology. I mean, everybody, all the kids, they want technological items for their birthdays or the holidays. And at the school, of course, you know, they're measuring each other like, oh, well, look at this watch I've got or this smartphone. So I don't see it going away. And I understand some people will say, well, wait a minute, we can't take it away from them, but is there an upside? Before we go to the downside, is there an upside?
I think that technology can really open up the platform in education for kids. If you have kids, if you think about kids, there's 25, 30 kids in a classroom, and there's all of these different levels of educational ability. Technology can be really useful to get the kids that are at the higher end higher, and the kids on the lower end the extra help that they may need. So there's definitely an upside to technology on how we can use it with our kids.
All right. Well, do you think that there's particular types of technology that are worse for them than others?
I think that the ones that they sit on that are mindless, not interactive, and that are situations that are really just more entertainment for them versus those that allow them to be creative and put their own spin on things are obviously worse than those that we can open them up with. But the platforms that are online that allow them to have access to these areas that we may not want our kids to be open to are the ones that I'm obviously more concerned about as a parent and as a professional.
Well, tell me this. At what age do you think it's appropriate to allow a child to have technology?
So the average age right now is about 6, where kids are actually being handed their own tablet or cell phone. And that's too early. So for my perspective, I look at the brain development of kids, and at 3, they have this huge neuronal burst that occurs, and they really don't have any sort of trimming or what we call pruning is in the medical field from those neurons until they're about 7, 8 years old. So if you're handing them technology at 6, it's really kind of like the wild, wild west in their brains. And then they have another burst at 13, between 12 and 13. And then again, you have this, again, kind of chaotic system that's going on. And you have to let them develop those neuronal connections before you introduce these things that can potentially change the structure of their brain.
Okay, so my question would be, because the skeptics would say, well, what about television? Because we've had television for several generations right now, and kids have always been parked in front of television, and it's flickering, and clearly you can't interact with it like you would a smartphone or something, but is there any scientific studies that would show that this is worse than television?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's lots of studies that are coming out that say that the more aggressive and violent exposures kids have, so for instance, in television, back when we were watching television, there were rankings and there were ratings based upon what age group may be watching. So they weren't putting on super violent shows in mid-afternoon. They'd be on in the evenings. So they were able to really monitor when those children could have been exposed to it. Today, that doesn't exist anymore. Kids can access anything at any time. And so the research shows that the more exposure to violence, for instance, then you have kids that are more aggressive and less empathetic than ever in history.
Okay, that I understand. That's a content issue, but from what I'm getting, from what I'm seeing about your work, is just the interaction with the machine itself is actually changing the pathways of their brains?
Right. It does,
Okay.
in certain ways. What happens with kids is that there's something that's called the dopamine pathway for when you're having, like, if you have a substance abuse problem or something like that. Process addictions are different. So if you're getting something that is excitatory or it makes you happy or it feels good, like technology does for kids, then that pathway, that dopamine pleasure pathway, actually gets stimulated. And so those kids want that more and more. So that's different than, say, because they're interacting in it, than passively watching television. And that's why it actually structurally changes the brain, because now there's activity on their part that's interacting with the technology.
Which reinforces the changes, I guess.
Correct, right.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the physical consequences of the usage of this technology. So tell me this, if I'm a parent, I am a parent, and my kids love technology, and it concerns me sometimes, but I love tech. We're in new media. That's what we're doing here today. I've got my iPhone and all of that. And tell me what it does to people, and to children especially.
So I think that it starts with kids. I think adults are just as guilty of it, but that it really disconnects us from having that interpersonal connection, because we have something that layers in between us. So for instance, I can send you a text message, or we can email with each other, and we now know each other. And it used to be called parasocial interaction back in the 50s, like when they researched it, where people feel connected to others without having real life connection. And our children are now growing up only having that parasocial interaction. They're really not communicating in person the same way that most of their parents or their grandparents grew up interacting. So it's just changing the way that we are going through society and how we're changing the way that we relate to one another.
Well, I can see that. I've heard it said that, for instance, like social media, which started out as a platform for us to be social, has actually made us less social, which is what I think that you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's weird because now people don't call each other even.
Right.
They just text. It's like, and I get that too, because sometimes I'm not in the mood for a phone call. If I could express my point of view in a short message and not have to talk to that person, I might do that. But so everything is changing.
Yeah. I just posted that actually on Twitter. Nordstrom had a shirt that said, "Don't call, text."
So really, and as the show goes on, I have a mad plan that I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
But for the parent that is concerned about their children using these machines too much, overuse of technology, I'm sure there's some common sense things that anyone would recognize, but tell us some things that we might not know that says, you know what, your child is using too much technology.
So really accessing how much data that they're utilizing is really important to look at, because most parents, most kids don't really understand that streaming something, it uses a lot of data. And so,
yeah,
as a parent, you probably have gone through this, where you've gone over
that AT&T message, you are now 90% of your data plan.
Right. So typically teens, their circadian rhythm changes. So about 12 and 13, they start to stay up later and later at night. So one of the telltale signs is tiredness or lethargy, or where kids, you can tell in the morning, haven't been sleeping. Oftentimes you'll find them up on their phones 2, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. sometimes in the morning, streaming Netflix or whatever show that they're watching on their actual cell phones.
And I guess the new iPhone has a different lighting that's supposed to be less damaging to our circadian rhythms. But I mean, is that
they're still not sleeping.
Sure.
So the light might actually help their melatonin start to engage, but it's still not disengaging them from the interaction that they feel like they're having. So that's the part that I think that we don't know how to turn it off anymore, because everything is so exciting, because we can open up a world through those phones now. And so it's really hard to turn that off.
When we were talking before the show, you told me a very distressing story. You had just spoken to a middle school, I think, and tell our audience what was going on here.
So we had about 800 children that are 12 and 13, so various developmental stages in that, but about 30% of them were involved in what is called sexting. And that is sending either verbal text messages that are sexually explicit or pictures of themselves. And what happened was that there's an SRO, or a safety resource officer, on campus, and they started to pull these kids in to interview them and let them know that they'd been identified as some of these kids. Out of those 30%, most of them, I think that they said about 95%, said they didn't want their parents to find out. Don't tell them. The SRO said, well, you are allowed to have your parents there, and you're allowed to have somebody here for you. And they said, no, I'll just tell you, my friendly officer. Mm-hmm. And so they told them all the details that they were doing. And quite frankly, those legally what happened was that they were given their juvenile Miranda rights, and then those children were written up for all of those incidences on that police report. And so about half of them were arrested at that point.
Was that
12 and 13 years old.
Was that here in California?
That was in Arizona. California actually has more strict laws than we do in Arizona. So with their misdemeanors in Arizona, in California it would have been a felony. And as a felony, they would have been, because it's child pornography, they would have been arrested, and then they would have been charged as child pornography, even teen to teen pictures exchanged. Doesn't mean an adult's involved. And then that in turn would require them to be registered as sexual offenders for the rest of their life, meaning on applications to jobs and colleges for the rest of their life that they would have to register.
So what we're talking about here is not only the physical and mental consequences of overuse of technology, but now we're talking about legal ramifications that will follow a child for the rest of their life.
Right, and the stigma and the emotional hurt and all of those things that come with that is actually like a ripple that goes through society, because we all feel it then.
Listen, I'm the last guy to want any additional laws, but if I'm understanding you correctly, and you're saying that these kids are sexting back and forth, they get busted, and then of course they don't want their parents to know, of course. But now they're signing a junior Miranda rights. I mean, that's...
A lot of controversy in the field on that, but it is legal for the schools and for them to do it. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So kids that are overusing technology, when we look at addictions or we look at behavioral issues, whether it be drugs or eating or whatever, there will be certain manifestations of those symptoms. What else are some symptoms, especially in young kids, of overuse of technology?
So a lot of the younger kids we see is their inability to emotionally regulate. So little kids you'll see naturally tantrum. We've all, everybody has tantruming kids through the dawn of ages, because kids get tired or they get emotionally unstable based on food issues or things like that. Technology has added that into kind of a steroid type level, because they don't know how to interact in the world without technology. So the minute you turn it off, then they turn into these kind of what we see like as kind of wild beasts out there, where the only thing that can pacify them is to give them back technology. So that emotional regulation piece is really the part that I see with the young kids that we need to address.
I've had friends over at the house, and listen, I'm not picking on anyone, because my daughter was way into Minecraft at one point. And we've had friends over, and and I'm just using this as an example because it's one of the first things that I can think of. And it's like, the child is small, the child wants to play Minecraft really, really bad. We're all visiting, and listen, we all want to socialize. So you want to let them do something so that you can socialize. But yes, this idea that we're raising kids that they're already hooked on some kind of a drug, it's just heavy.
Yeah, so in that situation, if you fast forward that kid at every social gathering, if they've been given a tablet, and granted, I'm a parent, so I'm guilty as well, but how do you fast forward in time? How do they ever understand how to sit and have a conversation and socialize without it? Because the schools now have tablets, their life now walks around with it, so they never really learn how to have those proper interactions. And
It has changed our entire society. I mean, now you're hearing, you used to hear about tennis elbow or something. Now you're hearing like physical ailments resulted, from hunching over your computer or whatever. Yeah, exactly. But if you go to a concert now, it's like, it's just annoying. I mean, people can't be in the moment at all without thinking that, okay, so this 15, 30 seconds, 45 seconds of horrible audio and video I'm going to shoot of this band is somehow really going to be memorable to me. It's weird. I mean, you go to a show, and this is just another example, and it's thousands of phones held up in the air, and it's weird. It's like we're voluntarily becoming cyborgs or something. It's like we can't just be in the moment.
Right. Digital hoarding, I call it, where people are actually hoarding data and like having to hold on to it. We talked earlier about the Fitbit. If I didn't wear my Fitbit when I went for a run, did it count? Like, did I get the credit for it? So if people aren't videoing themselves at concerts or actually recording it, they feel like it doesn't count anymore. So how do you get rid of that data? I don't want to delete that on my phone. So that's what I call digital hoarding in my practice.
Okay, so let's say my child has got significant issues and I come to you. How are you going to treat my child? What are you going to determine about them, and then what course of action are we going to take?
So I typically look at kind of four main areas. I look at behaviorally, we've talked about a little bit, interpersonally, how they relate with others, physically, and then I look at emotionally. So those are kind of the four main areas I assess. I have what is called a tech use continuum that I kind of test, and I look at those areas, because I can have the star basketball player who's 14, 15 years old, who's great physically and he's in shape and he doesn't have any of the physical damages that maybe somebody who's a gamer and is overweight, but I also have an issue with the interpersonal part. So I don't want to do a full assessment and do everything with every kid.
Sure.
So I break it down and I look at what are their areas, and then I just pull them out of it a little bit when we talk, and I say, all right, where do you want to go? And really kind of teach them where those skills are that they're missing. So that's how I address it in my practice.
But surely they're very resistant, I'm guessing.
Most of the kids, obviously, so obviously when they first come in, it's the parent's idea, right? They've seen me somewhere on TV or on the radio and they want to come in. The kids come in and they're a little bit hesitant in the beginning, but my approach and how I do it is that this is life. We've got to work together. I don't judge, and I say, why does this work for you? What's happening with you? And I would say a majority of the time they've been bullied online.
Sure. They've
had what we call digital shunning, where the kids have actually disincluded them publicly on things. So they're really not as attached to the media as I think as parents we see them, but they don't know how to step out. So I just kind of help them find a door to kind of step out for a little bit, and it gives them permission in some ways. So I'm pretty successful in that sense, because I just help them see it in a bigger light.
No, that makes sense to me, because you are showing them that this is part of just peer pressure, and you don't have to be part of that.
Right.
And then by not being part of it, you're not beating yourself up so hard.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to another thing, because I was seeing some statistics regarding the amount of data that we take in, and this is not limited to kids. Now we're talking about adults as well. And I mean, it was staggering. If I can find it, it was something like 6 newspapers a day worth of data?
Correct. That's on average, we're taking in the same content amount as 6 newspapers a day. And we're generating 2 newspapers worth. That's on average.
So wow. So we're talking about visual media, information, emails, just all of this put together being the equivalent of 6 newspapers.
Right. And how do we synthesize all of that, even with adult brains that are fully functioning with everything developed, is really challenging for most people, because we weren't intended to take in that much data. And then how do we triage it, or how do we determine what's important and not important? That's been the challenge, I think, over the last decade.
One of the things that I see occasionally online, and it has to do again with internalizing or processing this data, is, and I'm the first guy to admit that I'm one of the people that does this, and is that when you wake up in the morning, don't check your email. Get your day started, because if you check your email, you're already in this zone where you're juggling issues or what, you haven't even really started your day.
Absolutely. It's a great piece of advice. Yeah. I always say just ground yourself in the morning before you even start anything and get your plan in place before you let somebody hijack it with anything that you're going to see online.
But that's hard to do, especially like some people, they feel like they're overachievers, man, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to get stuff done, so I'm going to start early, and plus, again, we're addicted to it. It's like, I mean, did somebody email me? Do I need to address that? You know, and
Right.
and then there's the thing, you were talking about it with kids, but here again, it's with adults. I mean, and I do this, so I'm not pointing fingers. Like reading until I fall asleep on my phone. Probably horrible, right?
Well, the light isn't great for you.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people use Nooks and cell phones and things like that because they digitally can hold more information than, say, like a traditional book. The light is what can strike you as bad, but again, when you have it on a cell phone, will you have a text message come in or will you have an email come in that notifies you while you're reading something? That's where I think that the issue can happen, where you're now not just reading, now you're multitasking, and now you're trying to manage something when you're trying to be winding down for the night.
Sure. So in your work with the Technology Wellness Center, tell me what you're actually leaving here to go to another event, and you spoke at that school. So you and the people that you work with, how do you outreach? How do you try to spread your message and help people outside of your practice?
Like things like this, you know, I try to share as much of the data as I can. I go to very interesting trainings with, I was with a visiting scholar with the FBI, so I get invited to do some trainings with them, with the IRS, and with Bitcoin and Darknet and all that stuff. I try to bring in as much information, and then I go out and I speak, and I go on TV, and I try to share that information so that as a public, like we're all together in this. I used to think that it was really weird where people would say that it takes a village to raise children.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes not only a village to raise children, but it takes a village or a community to come together to really understand what's happening out there. So that's how I approach life, is I try to share the messaging as much as I possibly can.
Well, you mentioned the FBI.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because another horrible issue is, and another statistic that I saw, which was that by the time a child was 18, I believe 1 in 5 would receive a sexually aggressive solicitation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Through the internet.
I am not afraid of the white van driving down the street picking up our children anymore, because when that happened, you'd have a predator going on our streets looking for kids to pick up. Today, if you interview sexual predators or people who are trying to reach children, they will actually tell you that they can work 50 to 100 kids at a time, and they only need one to turn. So they can put themselves up at any profile that they want. They can pretend who they are, and they can take months and months to groom our children into trusting them, and then coming down and meeting at the Starbucks finally, and our kids go. And that's the part that terrifies me, is because what we don't teach our kids is about the bad people that are out there, because we don't want them to get too scared. But at any given time, there's 1.2 million sexual predators online looking for our children. That terrifies me. So if our kids are posting information on Facebook and they're putting stuff out there on Instagram or Snapchat, that's exactly where they're going. They go there and they troll and they look for that information. And
they find the weak one that they can finally groom
Absolutely.
into whatever it is. So I've had my talk with my daughters about, never get in a car with anybody. And we've had the talks about these various apps. And listen, mom and daddy are good, but not everybody's like us. And I think my kids listen, but what is a better argument? I mean, what is the better way to deliver this? Because some kids are gonna be like, yeah, I've heard that kind of thing before. What do you really say to a child to get them to understand the gravity of this without completely freaking them out?
I think that there lies the issue. I think that we're so worried about freaking them out, when in fact I think that they already are exposed to so much that I think that we need to freak them out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we
Sure.
really do need to stop placating the fact that we think that our kids aren't mature enough, because our kids are watching and seeing things at levels that we can't even imagine. So I think that you say, this is what happens, this is what they're gonna do, and this is how they trick you. Because they've grown up with media in all these different platforms, and they believe what they read. So if you don't go in, one of the things I work with kids about and teach them is when you do searches on Google, or if you go on the internet on whatever platform you're going in, those first 5 searches are probably paid for. And so you have to look at what advertising is and what isn't. You have to look at what the source is, like things like that, elementary school, middle school kids, they're just trying to get a report done on giraffes. But if you Google giraffes and you know that it's going to be, you don't know what's going to show up on that.
Sure.
So.
Well, here again, the other side of the coin, again, somebody might say, well, Michael, you know what, when I was growing up, I isolated myself. It's like I was into books, I was into music, I would shut the door, and that was my, and I insulated myself from the things that bothered me. I read science fiction, I listened to rock and roll, and I shut that door. So what's the big difference between that and this, other than what, I mean, I'm talking just kind of out loud and thinking, I guess it's obvious that there's deeper levels of things, but some people might argue, listen, you're still just isolating yourself and taking your mind off of issues.
So I think when you were isolating yourself, there wasn't a porthole like that you could jump into and go deep into different worlds where people could interface with you in real time and live time.
Sure.
So when you got frustrated with your parents or you were having a bad day at school, you go in, you turn the music on loud, and it would go away.
Yeah.
Our children don't have a way to really escape. Shutting that door is a very visual message to the rest of the world. I need time alone. Our children don't have time alone. Our 20-year-olds don't have time alone. That's the big difference.
And that's so weird because they don't have time alone, yet they're becoming more alone.
Right. Right. They feel more alone than ever.
Okay, so now let's take this 15, 20 years down the line. And I mentioned to you beforehand, I've done shows, because here's ultimately where I think this is going, for better or worse.
Okay.
And listen, you're doing the right thing, but what I'm also thinking is going to happen, our children have these devices that we didn't have. And you're right, they're interacting with them on a level which we could not interact with that book or that television screen or that record. So at the school, they've all got their phones, even though they're sitting beside each other and they're texting. My point is, like when we talk about things like transhumanism or something like that, where you're going to change your body or upgrade your mind, this is all inevitable for better or worse, I think, but do you think that, I don't even know how to say this exactly, because I don't want to be all doomy and pessimistic, like we're all going to merge into machines, but I kind of get it. The people that have been putting forth those types of ideas, now our children will be far more ready to do that because they've had access to technology from such a young age. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. I think that that's a bit of a leap for the next 10 years if we're going to do that.
20 years.
Okay, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
I think that what you're going to start seeing is more of the virtual reality world, the 3D versions which are starting to come out,
Yes.
and haptic technologies, which are wearable technologies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that are coming up. Like our kids won't have a 2D phone system anymore. It'll actually be something where they'll have sunglasses on and they'll actually be interfacing in real time where somebody else can see what they're seeing. And again, great, but that's probably the next 10 to 20 years is what we're going to see.
Yeah.
Whether or not you're going to have something where you're going to start plugging in and doing those kind of things, that's pretty far off out into the future. And again, like, could it happen? Probably. I mean, they're putting nanobots into humans and actually delivering medicine, and they're doing things that we've never done before. So I think that there's a lot of technologies that are probably coming, and I think that how far we let that go is really up to society. And there's ethical and moral dilemmas in all of that we really have to consider before we get there.
Well, here's another thing. When we talk about society, unfortunately, sometimes the poorest among us, they eat the worst because they can only afford the fast foods or the cheaper processed things. When you're looking at the people that you work with, do you see segments of the society that are more prone to this, or is everybody just completely prone to it?
Everybody's prone
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah.
It doesn't discriminate, and I really do think that it is now this new drug in our society, and it's a process addiction that people are getting their hands on, and we have a really hard time letting go of it. And it doesn't matter any walk of life, just like you would see in any sort of drug.
All right. Well, again, let's step into the future. Do you think that there will be groups of people who just, they shun all of this? They're like, all right, you know what? I've had enough. People like Dr. Strohman are correct. We got to unplug. We got to get out of this. Do you think that there will be groups that will rise up and say, hey, let's just be humans again and talk to each other?
I think it's an interesting question, because I think that there's going to be those people that are off grid and those that are on grid. And I think that the people that figure out that when you go off grid, and if you're not on social media and you're not connected, then you really technically can disappear. And so I think that there's probably going to be a merge into some people that really don't want to be connected in that world, and I think that they will disconnect, and I think that they will be probably in this kind of different area. If I'm predicting moving forward, I think that there's some people that will choose to have that area of or community, if you will, that is connected to each other instead of kind of the board, so
Sure.
to speak.
Well, here's the other thing. It's like, in this society that we have right now, I mean, you've got to be adept at technology. So a kid might say, well, wait a minute, you're taking my phone away from me, you're taking my computer. I mean, I need to learn skills because all the money out there is being made using these tools. So listen, I hear what you're saying, and it's this balance, and it is moderation. And when I said technology is not going away, it just makes your work even more important, because we have to learn that balance.
We hope so. I mean, I hope that it matters. I mean, I hope that not everybody just goes in and doesn't forget how important it is to still have real life experiences, and that we do have a balance with that versus like technology and social media and all of those things. But I think that both are important. I think that we have to figure out a way to balance it better, and that's my argument.
Well, I like what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on, because I know your schedule was busy, and this is a subject that is, I think I heard in a recent interview you did, I mean, and it's true, this is the new addiction, this is the new drug. There's plenty of drugs, but this is the socially acceptable drug for all ages.
Absolutely, and we hand it over readily as parents.
Because we need a little time, so like,
Because we
hey,
just need a little time.
Yeah. You used to park them in front of Teletubbies, and now you give them, the birds that they throw rocks at or whatever, like whatever it is. All right, well, I tell you what, we're going to wrap that up. Dr. Strohman, thank you so much.
Thank you for having
I
me.
really enjoyed this. I hope you'll come back, because these issues, there's so many aspects of this we didn't even get to touch on today that result from the overuse of technology, and it's important, and we will have you back.
Great, I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this. And listen, if it wasn't for the internet, you wouldn't be watching me. So I love the internet, I love technology, and we all know we need that balance. And occasionally we got to step away from the machine. So until next week, my name is Michael. This has been Antidote. You, me, every single one of us, we are the antidote.